Section 27 of the Diary of a Russian Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Janet Wedge. The Diary of a Russian Lady by Barbara Doukhovsky, Lucerne. Lucerne. Here are the Alps, towering in all their glory, their immense contours sharp and clear. A few minutes more, and our train stops at Lucerne. We were warned that the principal hotels at Lucerne were always full during the season, and that we had better order rooms beforehand by telegram. So we wired for an apartment at the hotel Schweizerhof, but it led to nothing. And when the omnibus pulled up at this hotel, we learned to our disgust it was quite full. A superior-looking gentleman at the desk announced that he had no single room disengaged at present. We were told to come next morning, and there might then be an apartment free in the meanwhile. Thanks to our telegram, a room had been provided for us in a private house just opposite. We followed a waiter who showed us the way there, and mounted to our room in anything but a sweet temper. It proved to be small but bright, and perfectly neat, and had nice beds disappearing completely under huge eiderdowns with linen smelling of lavender. The furniture was simple, the walls hung all over with framed portrait groups of antiquated photography. Amateur pictures of our landlady's parents stared down at us over the mantelpiece. On one side of them hung a flaming heart made of red paper, and on the other a small crooked mirror in which we could see only half of our faces reflected in it. I have seen nature insulted, but never to such an extent. On the mantelpiece, enclosed in a glass case, stood a clock, which didn't mark the hour. Our landlady, a stout, comely-looking woman, proposed coffee and was altogether nice to us. The next day we went for the promised room at the Schweizerhof, but the manager, with his hands in both his pockets, announced curtly that there was no room free until evening. There remained nothing else to do but to walk away in quest of another apartment. After a pretty hot chase, we succeeded in finding a comfortable room at the Hotel National on the second floor, with a good view on the lake, looking big as a sea, and the majestic Mount Pilatus, from where Pontius Pilatus is said to have thrown himself into the lake after the crucifixion. The legend goes that he fled from Jerusalem and wandered about the earth with a troubled conscience, and put an end to his misery on the heights of Mount Pilatus by drowning himself. From our windows we could also see the port, where the steamers, black with people, were coming and going all the time, carrying away crowds of passengers in different directions of the beautiful lake. We are going to be here a week and make trips round about. I am prepared to be delighted with everybody and everything. Next morning, we took our luncheon on our little railed balcony in cool comfort. The weather was clear, and we had a very good view of the distant ranges of the mountains and the snow-hooded alpine peaks. There are charming drives round about. After breakfast, we took a carriage and drove out of town along a well-kept road. We were out in the lovely undulating country land, amid vineyards and orchards. I feasted my eyes on the beautiful country scene and inhaled with delight the sweet smell of the perfumed meadows and fields, where the grain was tall and golden. We saw a tourist camping in the fields under an improvised tent made by means of his cloak suspended on his stick, making watercolor sketches of the lovely landscape. Our driver, wanting to give a rest to his horse, stopped before the Jardin des Glaciers, where an old guardian was explaining the museum belonging to this garden to a little group of anxious sightseers in monotonous tones. An immense plan worked in relief of all the Swiss cantons especially attracted our attention. Close by the Jardin des Glaciers, the Lion de Lucerne is carved out of the rock of the cliff. His size is colossal. The great beast's protecting paw rests upon the lilies of France. This gigantic thing serves as a monument to the memory of the monarchists killed in France during the horrors of the Terror, a singular mausoleum for a republican country. On our way back to the hotel, we crossed a long covered wooden bridge which contains about 300 pictures by old Swiss masters. We got back to the hotel just in time for lunch. I generally avoid being on show at table d'hôte and was very displeased with Sergi for insisting on my going down. My eyes wandered rapidly about the table, and it did not improve my appetite, for everybody was so unattractive. Just opposite me sat a fat, bejeweled matron who had made her appearance on this planet some 70 years ago at least, and who, at a prehistorical period, could have been rather nice. But she did look such a guy now, dressed ridiculously for her age, and outrageously painted, with black circles about her eyes which made them look like goggles, and a permanent blush palpably not due to nature. Her old face and youthful clothes presented an alarming contrast, but she considered herself still irresistible, and affected little moods and attitudes that sat incongruously upon her elderly looks. She rolled her eyes like a love-smitten cat, showing off her rings and bracelets, and coquetted with her neighbors, showing her false teeth in a hideous grimace. The old crone was a laughing-stock to everybody. She saw these mocking glances, but being completely satisfied with herself, she evidently attributed them to envy. She stared about her with a long-handled lorgnette and turned it rudely on me, eyeing me disagreeably. I returned her stare with a look of defiance. Already put into a nervous state by the crossfire of masculine and feminine glances, I could not eat my lunch, and as soon as the horrid table d'hôte was at an end, I hurried up into my room and indulged in a good cry. By dinner time I was still in the same mood and would not go down, declaring that I had no appetite. I was much too disfigured by weeping to dine even at a separate table. Next morning, when Sergi went to take his bath in the Reuss River, his bather, an old retired Swiss soldier, asked him if it was true that our Russian soldiers served under arms the whole year. In Switzerland, as it appears, the soldiers are only assembled during 8 weeks. Every 2 years they assemble for the grand maneuvers, and this is all the service the Swiss warriors go through. It is true that they have not at all a martial air, arrayed in long coats that touch the ground and tangle about their legs. After lunch we went for a sail on the Lac des Quatre Cantons and had a delightful trip to Fleuelen. With a gentle breeze we steamed off on the smooth waters. All the passengers, English for the most part, wearing leather gaiters and green Tyrolese felt hats with a feather in them were laden with alpenstocks with a bunch of edelweiss on the top, and with cameras and knapsacks strapped upon their backs. We had dinner on board, whilst a troupe of Tyrolese singers danced on the deck. On the blue and limpid lake, fishermen were spreading their nets and preparing their tackle for the day's labor. Here is a steamer coming towards us. The waiters on it are waving their napkins instead of handkerchiefs, saluting their comrades on our boat. We are passing now the tiny chalet of Wilhelm Tell, situated on the shore of the lake. A little further on, we saw a large monument erected on the rock to the memory of Schiller. We glided for some time side by side with a railway train which made off in the direction of St. Gotthard, appearing and disappearing in numerous tunnels. Roaring waterfalls and picturesque cascades leap from the heights of high and steep hills. We are now approaching the village of Flüelen, the nearest spot to the snow mountains, whose white peaks were dazzling on the blue sky. On approaching the small town of Wiesnau, from where one mounts by a funicular line on the summit of the Rigi Kulm, a vast hill mounting to the sky, we saw an engine inclined almost perpendicularly, pushing one car up the steep mountain. From the peak, tumultuous torrents formed by the melting of the snow fell down. The road up the Rigi is an extraordinary piece of engineering, and how the funicular manages to climb it is a matter of surprise. The weather was so clear that we could actually see the people walking about on the top of the mountain, and it gave us the desire to follow their example the next day. We were back at Lucerne towards evening, and after taking tea, we sat for a short time in wicker chairs under the chestnuts on the quay, and went to end our evening to the theater to see a new play. I felt thoroughly fatigued and dozed off during the performance. The play appeared awfully dull, and I thought the acting was atrocious. So did everyone, for the curtain dropped and nobody applauded. The next morning we started from Lucerne to make the ascent of the Rigi Kulm. We went down the lake on a steamboat and got ashore at Wiesnau. I was eyeing the ascent above me with great awe. It was not an easy affair. We had to climb a road leading skyward like an interminable staircase by the funicular railway. It was incredible that the locomotive, standing on his hind legs, so to speak, should creep up the mountain. I thought no one but a goat could surmount it. The funicular contains two cars, roof but open from the sides. The seats are tilted back, which enables the passengers to sit level while going up the steep incline. Whether going up or down, the engine is always at the lower end of the train. The passengers sit backwards going up and face forward going down. Our engine began to climb laboriously the steep mountain, which is 6,000 feet high, rappelling slowly, step by step, to the toothed rails, having on each side gigantic precipices clothed with pines. Loud cataracts roared below unseen. The road lay between high granite walls. Through a gap in the rocks, unfathomable depths disclosed themselves below us, chilling my blood and making me dizzy. I gripped Sergei's arm, pinching him very hard. But Sergei, whose nerves were stronger than mine, and who didn't see any danger at all, said laughingly to me that it was quite unnecessary to give him the blues, but I only grabbed his arm the tighter. The view grew fairer and fairer as we mounted. From here, one could see the four lakes in the shape of a cross, on which the water appeared a smooth sapphire floor, sparkling with sails no bigger than pinheads, and the far stretching large and fertile valley. Now we began to climb up a narrow bridge, thrown over a precipice at the bottom of which a rapid torrent rolled. I will not pretend I was not frightened. I was very. Footpaths are traced for pedestrians here and there. We saw a tourist resting against a huge stone in the crevice of a rock. We crawled higher and higher till we met the clouds that rested on the mountain sides. We are in the clouds now. The sun is shining above us, and underneath the whole space is covered with thick clouds, forming a milky ocean and screening our way completely. When the clouds dispersed, we discovered wonders in the immense alpine landscape and made out in the distance a group of cows with huge bells on their necks, lying phlegmatically amongst the clouds. All at once there was a full stop. It happened to be a drowsy black cow, immovable and contemplative, lying placidly on the rails, which we had nearly run over. The air grew quite chilly. Though warmly wrapped up, I was shivering with cold, and Sergi drew his cloak close round me. Our fellow travelers had their collars turned up to their ears. I could only see the tops of their glowing noses. My neighbor, a thin, poorly-looking individual wearing a chauffeur's cap, had tied his handkerchief over it. The wind was very strong, and I was nearly thrown off my seat and clung terror-struck to the sides of the car, wishing that I had never consented to this aerial drive. We had left below us every vestige of vegetation. A flight of rooks are screaming overhead. At every stoppage, our ears begin to tingle. At last we have reached the final bit of ascent to the summit of the Rigi and have to quit our car. We can hardly see 2 steps before us. Suddenly, out of the fog, came the sound of a bell. It was the sign given from the Rigi Hotel in order to aid us to find our way to it in the thick mist which enclosed us. We walked slowly, one behind the other, following the direction the sound came from, and shivering with cold. On reaching the hotel, perched on the top of the mountain, we entered a large dining room filled with a cosmopolitan crowd of tourists, sitting at a long table d'hôte, who have assembled here to survey the sunset from the mountaintop. It was delightful to get into the hall with the thick, fragrant warmth of a fire of monster logs burning in a huge chimney piece reaching halfway to the ceiling, which could easily contain a whole tree. We sat down at table and were soon thoroughly warmed by the steaming soup. There was a loud, animated talk and a curious mixture of languages. You might hear every tongue of Europe. There were Americans, Germans, Englishmen, and a large number of countrymen of ours. Directly after dinner, the whole company climbed up the last bit of rough land which led to the top of the summit of the Rigi Kulm. I found it tiresome work, plowing our way slowly towards it, but the view from there was more than a compensation. We seemed to look into fairyland, and though I was by no means a sentimental person, I uttered a cry of delight in looking forth on the wide expanse of hill, forest, and plain that lay beneath us. Suddenly a cloud rolled by beneath our feet, completely obliterating the landscape. Sometimes the mists would part and disclose glorious views. Then again they would form an impenetrable curtain. The keen mountain air was very fresh on the windy summit, and everyone was shivering and jumping about to keep warm. After having admired this spectacle, we returned to the station in order to make the ascent of another peak of the Rigi, the Schneideck. We plunged again into an ocean of clouds nearly at hand's reach. When the clouds cleared away, we mistook forests for patches of green grass, and mighty trees for thorn shrubs. It was as if we gazed down from a balloon, an odd sensation. I had never experienced it before. When we reached the Kaltbad station, a group of yellow-haired children brought us bunches of edelweiss, a small white flower which grows on the top of high mountains. Kaltbad is famous by its splendid and spacious hotel, full of bustle and movement. The vestibule was filled with English and American tourists, walking about and talking. They all seemed to know one another. The hotel has a splendid situation about 2,000 feet above the sea level and offers every possible comfort to its guests. Notwithstanding its great altitude, it has every modern improvement, even gasworks. We were far above the clouds whilst we took our coffee on the veranda. A storm broke out beneath us suddenly. Peals of thunder resounded, and the rain began to fall in torrents, whilst above us the sky was perfectly blue and the sun shone brightly. On our way back to Lucerne, at the sight of the descent we had to make, terror seized me. It looked the most breakneck thing in the world, and it made me quite giddy to look down into the valley, which is about 900 feet below. The hill was so steep that you felt as if you were going to pitch head first down it when you began to descend. We got back to our hotel just in time for our well-earned dinner. The next day, having put our heavy luggage in deposit at the warehouse, we proceeded on our journey and went to rove about Switzerland. In the first place, we are going to Interlaken. We have reached Alpnacht by steamboat and had great difficulties in getting seats in the brakes that run to Interlaken. The passengers had to take them by assault. We waited our turn with a surprisingly long delay. The huge conveyances with 6 powerful horses put to them were filling fast, and there were still no places assigned to us. At last we were provided with a supplement in the shape of a landau. There was room for 4 in our carriage. 2 seats were already occupied by a very cross German lady and her daughter, who looked at us as if they wished to order our instant execution. They were most peevish companions and grumbled all the way that der Papa had been placed into another supplementary conveyance. We made sustained efforts at conversation, but only received rebuffs. Really, I quite expected them to bite us. We proceeded at a brisk pace, changing horses only once. At 12 o'clock, we stopped halfway in a little hamlet where lunch had been prepared for us in an inn named Au Lion d'Or, where our horses were being changed. The table d'hôte was served by pretty apple-cheeked waitresses dressed in the quaint costume of the Swiss peasant. They wore red skirts and black velvet bodices, edged with little buttons of sparkling steel, with a flowered silk kerchief crossed over their breasts and a golden cross on their necks. It was time for us to move on. When we returned to our carriage, we found it had another occupant. the cross lady's husband, der Papa, a little man with a big red mustache, who declared in a very rough tone that the seat belonged to him. It appears that it really was his place, and that his wife had exchanged seats of her own free will with two other German travelers. One of them immediately on starting leisurely took off his coat, putting himself at his ease, and sat all the rest of the journey in his shirt sleeves. The carriage went slowly winding up a long ascent. The road crept on between mountain slopes. Close at hand, the great form of the Jungfrau rose white to the sky. The ascent was difficult enough, and when a specially steep bit was coming, the coachmen descended from their boxes to ease the horses up the rough track, walking by them and pulling vigorously at their long clay pipes. End of section 27.